Call her Carol. She never worked outside the home. When her husband Jim died at 71, she expected her income to be cut roughly in half. Instead, her monthly check barely changed, and the reason traces back to something Jim did 9 years before he died. What Jim did, and why almost nobody frames it the way this video is about to, comes later. But by the end, you'll understand why a decision that looks like it's only about one person's retirement is often quietly the most important financial decision a couple makes for whichever one of them ends up alone. And you'll understand why the timing of that decision, specifically when the higher-earning spouse chooses to claim, has consequences that reach far beyond their own lifetime. This is a composite story built around a pattern that shows up constantly in Social Security planning. Carol and Jim married in their early 20s, in a small town in Ohio where Jim had grown up. Jim became an electrician, got his license, and built a solid career over nearly 4 decades. It was steady, reliable, skilled work, the kind that came with a real earnings record. Carol raised their 3 kids, managed the household, volunteered at the school, and built a life that had genuine value but didn't generate a paycheck. By the time the kids were grown and out of the house, Carol had been out of the traditional workforce long enough that going back never made practical financial sense. The cost of re-entering, re-credentialing, and starting at an entry level in her 50s didn't pencil out. This wasn't an unusual situation for women of their generation. Millions of households made this same choice for the same practical reasons, but it meant something specific for their retirement finances. Carol had little to no earnings record of her own with the Social Security Administration. For decades, neither of them thought much about what that meant in concrete terms. Jim worked. Jim would eventually collect Social Security. Carol would receive a spousal benefit based on his record. That was the plan, and it worked fine for the years they were both alive and both collecting. The question neither of them had fully confronted until a financial planner sat them down and asked it directly was what happened to Carol's income the day Jim was gone. Here's the fear that creeps in for a lot of people in Carol's position, and it's worth naming directly because it shapes how people think about the entire question. If your spouse is the one with the earnings record and the one collecting the bigger check, it's natural to assume that when they die, your household income gets cut by roughly half. You were getting 2 checks. Now you're getting 1. The math seems obvious, and sometimes that fear is accurate. If the higher-earning spouse claimed Social Security early, took a permanently reduced benefit, and the survivor benefit flows from that reduced number, yes, the drop can be severe. But often, with deliberate planning, that fear turns out to be wrong. And the difference comes down to a part of Social Security that gets discussed far less than it should, a benefit most people know exists, but few people understand in detail: survivor benefits, and specifically how the claiming age of the higher earner directly shapes what the survivor is left with. Here's how it actually works, because the mechanics matter, and they surprise a lot of people. When a working spouse dies, the surviving spouse becomes eligible for a survivor benefit. That survivor benefit is not automatically half of what the couple was receiving while both were alive. According to Social Security Administration rules, it's based specifically on what the deceased spouse was receiving at the time of their death. A surviving spouse who has reached their own full retirement age for survivor benefits can receive up to 100% of the amount the deceased spouse was collecting. Let that sink in for a moment, because it changes the entire picture. If the deceased spouse had built up a large benefit by delaying their claim, the survivor inherits that large number. If the deceased spouse had claimed early and accepted a permanently reduced benefit, the survivor inherits that smaller, reduced number instead. For a spouse like Carol, who has little or no Social Security benefit of her own, this distinction is enormous. The survivor benefit doesn't supplement her retirement income. For a non-working or low-earning spouse, the survivor benefit essentially becomes her entire retirement income, potentially for decades. This is exactly why Carol's check barely changed when Jim died. Let's walk through the specific mechanics of what happened in their household. While Jim was alive, their household was receiving two things from Social Security: Jim's own retirement benefit, which he had maximized by delaying his claim, and a spousal benefit for Carol. The spousal benefit is capped at up to 50% of what Jim's benefit would have been at his own full retirement age, and it's worth understanding clearly that this spousal amount does not grow even if the higher earner delays claiming further past their full retirement age. Delaying past full retirement age grows the worker's own benefit and the eventual survivor benefit, but not the spousal benefit while both spouses are still alive. This surprises a lot of people. When Jim died, Carol's spousal benefit converted automatically into a survivor benefit. And here's where Jim's decision to delay until 70 paid off in a way that directly protected Carol. Because Jim had waited and built up a significantly larger personal benefit before he passed, that larger number is precisely what Carol inherited as her survivor benefit. It came close to covering what their combined household income from Social Security had been before his death. The household lost Jim's life, which was the actual loss that mattered. It did not lose anywhere near half its income. This is precisely why an increasing number of financial planners who specialize in Social Security strategy emphasize that the claiming age decision cannot really be treated as a purely individual choice when there's a lower earning or non-working spouse involved. It is a household decision with a built-in survivor insurance component, whether the couple consciously thinks of it that way or not. The higher earners benefit while both spouses are alive matters for their combined quality of life. But that same benefit amount also functions as the ceiling for what the surviving spouse will live on after the higher earner is gone, potentially for 10, 15, 20, or more years. A decision framed as "when should I start collecting my retirement benefit" is simultaneously and silently a decision about the financial floor of your spouse's widowhood. Most couples never discuss it in those terms. Most financial planning conversations don't frame it that way either, which means most couples make this decision without fully understanding what they're actually deciding. Here's what Jim actually did 9 years before he died, with the full picture of what he was deciding in front of him. He was eligible to claim Social Security at 62. By every individual calculation focused only on him, claiming somewhat earlier wouldn't have been an unreasonable choice. His family history wasn't one of exceptional longevity. He had some minor health concerns, nothing serious, but enough that a strictly personal break-even analysis might have suggested claiming in his mid to late 60s rather than waiting to 70. But Jim and Carol had sat down with a fee-only financial planner a few years before Jim's earliest claiming date, and that planner walked them through exactly this survivor benefit mechanic. Whatever Jim was receiving at the moment of his death would become Carol's new income floor for the rest of her life. Not a percentage of it, not a fraction calculated from some other formula. That number specifically. Jim understood what that meant. Carol was younger than him, in good health, and statistically likely to outlive him by a significant margin. The longer Carol lived after Jim, the more the size of his benefit at the time of his death would matter to her total lifetime income. Jim made the deliberate decision to delay claiming until 70, not because he expected to benefit from the larger check himself for many years, but because he understood that the larger number he built by waiting would become Carol's number the day he was gone. Here's the counterfactual that makes the stakes concrete enough to see clearly. Had Jim claimed Social Security at 62 instead of waiting until 70, his own monthly benefit would have been permanently reduced by approximately 30%, compared to his full retirement age benefit amount, and by even more compared to the delayed to 70 benefit he ultimately received. Carol's survivor benefit would have flowed from that reduced number, not from what he could have received, from what he actually chose to receive. Over a widowhood that, in Carol's case, stretched more than 15 years. That gap between the benefit Jim actually built and the reduced benefit he would have received by claiming early compounded into a difference measured in hundreds of thousands of dollars in Carol's total lifetime income, money that existed specifically because Jim waited or would not have existed if he hadn't. A few other details about survivor benefits are worth understanding if you're in a situation similar to Carol's, because the rules have nuances that matter. Survivor benefits are generally available starting at age 60, which is earlier than standard retirement benefits, though claiming at 60 permanently reduces the survivor benefit amount compared to waiting until survivor full retirement age. The full retirement age for survivor benefits is slightly different from standard retirement benefit full retirement age, and a Social Security specialist can give you the exact figure for your birth year. Remarriage is another detail worth understanding carefully. Remarriage before age 60 can affect survivor benefit eligibility in ways that matter, while remarriage at or after 60 generally does not. These rules are specific enough that a fee-only financial planner or a direct conversation with the Social Security Administration is the right place to get the exact figures for your particular situation rather than relying on general descriptions like this one. This reframes what Jim actually did 9 years before he died. What looked like a personal retirement timing decision was, in substance, a survivor planning decision. Jim wasn't primarily optimizing for his own lifetime payout. He was building the largest possible income floor for Carol, knowing that whichever of them died first, the other would inherit that number and live on it, potentially for a very long time. He never described it to Carol in those terms at the time. He just told her he wanted to wait a while longer if they could manage it financially. They could, and that quiet, practical, unannounced decision became the most consequential financial choice he ever made on her behalf. Not the house they bought, not the career he built. The year he chose to start collecting Social Security. If you're the higher earning spouse in your household, your Social Security claiming age is not just a personal retirement income decision. It's a survivor planning decision with consequences that could span decades of your spouse's life after you're gone. The right answer isn't the same for every couple. It depends on your health, your ages, your other income sources, and your specific benefit amounts. This is for educational and entertainment purposes, not personalized financial advice. Survivor benefit rules have specific details that depend on your exact situation, so consult the Social Security Administration directly or a qualified financial planner before making any decision. There's a video on this channel that walks through exactly how to calculate what different claiming ages would mean for your spouse's eventual survivor benefit.